Close your eyes now and let the air around you grow still, as if you are standing on the high, salt-sprayed cliffs of Ithaca. The world of the modern day is fading, replaced by the rhythmic pulse of the Aegean Sea. Tonight, we journey back to the very beginning, before the wooden horse, before the wine-dark sea, to the quiet moment a legend was first breathed into life. The blood of gods and thieves. Imagine a house of stone and olive wood, the home of Laertes, king of Ithaca. But to understand the child soon to be born, we must look further back into the veins of his mother, Anticlea. She was the daughter of Autolycus, a man whose name was spoken only in shadows and moonlight. Autolycus was no ordinary mortal. He was a son of Hermes, the messenger god, the prince of thieves, the master of the crossroads. From Hermes, the line of Odysseus inherited a divine spark. Not the raw thunder of Zeus or the rage of Ares, but the silver-tongued brilliance of the mind. It was a lineage of metis, or cunning intelligence. This blood meant that the child would never be the strongest man in the room, but he would always, invariably, be the smartest. The night of the storm. On the night of his birth, the air over the rugged peaks of Ithaca was heavy with the scent of ozone and rain. It is said that the portents were strange. The owls, birds of Athena, did not hunt that night, but sat in silent rows upon the rafters of the palace, their golden eyes fixed on the birthing chamber. As the child took his first breath, a great storm rolled in from the west. The lightning did not strike the earth in anger, but danced across the sky in jagged patterns, like the intricate maps of a long journey. The old nurses whispered that the child's cries were not of fear, but of a strange, rhythmic cadence, as if he were already weaving a story before he could even speak. The naming, the man of wrath. When the child was still a sprawling infant, his grandfather Autolycus came to Ithaca. As was the custom, the family asked the old master thief to name the boy. Autolycus looked down at the babe and felt the weight of the gods. He chose a name that was both a blessing and a burden: Odysseus. In the ancient tongue, this name carries the roots of Odysseus, meaning the man of wrath, or the one who is hated. It was a prophecy in a single word. Autolycus declared that because he had been at odds with many men in his life, the boy would inherit that friction. He would be a man who both provoked the anger of the gods and possessed a terrifying internal fire of his own. He was destined to be a man of many sorrows, a man pursued by the world, yet one who would outlast every shadow sent to claim him. Early omens of the mind. As the boy grew, the omens of his cleverness became the talk of the shepherds. While other children played with wooden swords, Odysseus was found watching the spiders weave their webs, studying the geometry of the trap. One evening, a golden eagle was seen flying low over the palace, carrying a serpent in its talons. Usually, this heralded a bloody victory in battle. But as the court watched, the serpent twisted its body, not to bite, but to coil around the eagle's wing, forcing the great bird to land peacefully in the palace courtyard. The elders saw the truth. Here was a spirit that would not win through brute force, but through the ability to turn an opponent's strength against themselves. The child Odysseus watched the eagle fly away, his young eyes reflecting the deep, dark blue of the sea he would one day conquer. For now, the storm had passed. The palace was warm, the hearth was glowing, and the hero was fast asleep, dreaming of islands yet unseen. Take a deep breath now, as the echoes of the great storm of his birth begin to fade into a gentle, rhythmic hum. The air turns cooler, smelling of mountain pine and wild thyme. We move now into the years of his youth, the years when a boy's spirit is tempered like bronze in the fire. The young Odysseus did not grow up in the gilded luxury of a mainland palace. He was raised on Ithaca, a rugged, goat-rearing island of sharp stones and vertical cliffs. This terrain carved his body into something lean and resilient. He learned early that on an island, one must look toward the horizon to see the future, but watch one's feet to survive the present. His father, Laertes, taught him the patience of the earth, how to plant a vineyard and prune the olive trees so they would bear fruit for 100 years. But it was his mother's side of the family that called him toward the wilder mysteries of the world. The journey to Mount Parnassus. When Odysseus reached the threshold of manhood, he traveled to the slopes of Mount Parnassus to visit his grandfather, Autolycus. This was a place of deep shadows and ancient limestone, where the veil between the human world and the divine felt thin. Autolycus, the master of the silver lie and the midnight raid, looked at his grandson and saw a spirit that mirrored his own. He did not teach the boy how to march in a phalanx. He taught him how to move through the woods without snapping a dry leaf, how to read the intentions of a beast by the twitch of its ear, and how to use the darkness as a cloak. The Great Boar Hunt. One crisp morning, as the mist clung to the ravines, Odysseus joined his uncles and grandfather on a hunt. They were tracking a monstrous wild boar, a creature of pure, bristling rage that had been terrorizing the mountain slopes. The party tracked the beast to a dense thicket, a place so overgrown that neither the sun nor the rain could pierce the canopy. Odysseus, fueled by the hot blood of youth and a desire to prove his lineage, was the first to charge when the boar erupted from the brush. The animal was a blur of white tusks and gray muscle. As the boar lunged, Odysseus raised his bronze spear, but the beast was faster. Its tusk ripped through the air, catching the boy just above the knee, tearing deep into the flesh and muscle. Despite the searing pain, Odysseus did not falter. He drove his spear home, burying the point in the boar's right shoulder and piercing its heart. The beast fell, and for a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of the young man and the drip of blood onto the forest floor. The scar that marks him. His uncles bound the wound with expert care, using incantations to staunch the flow of blood, a hint of the magic that always followed his family. The wound healed, but it left a distinct, jagged scar above his knee. This scar became his truest signature. It was his token of identity. In the years to come, he would wear many masks. He would be a beggar, a king, a soldier, and a castaway. He would change his name and hide his face. But the scar remained, the indelible proof of the boy who stood his ground against the wild. It was the physical manifestation of his name, the Man of Pain, marking him as one who had been initiated into the world through suffering. The early reputation for cunning. As he returned to Ithaca, the stories of his exploits began to weave together. People noticed that Odysseus did not just hunt, he outthought his prey. He was the one who could settle disputes between the shepherds not with a fist, but with a story that made both sides feel they had won. The elders began to whisper that the prince of Ithaca had a honeyed tongue and a mind that worked like a labyrinth. He was developing the metis, the craftiness that would one day build the wooden horse and navigate the terrors of the deep. He was no longer just a boy. He was a king in the making, waiting for the world to call him into the light. The mountain air is still now, and the young hero is resting, his hand resting unconsciously on the scar that defines him. The fire in the hearth of Ithaca burns low now, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. The peace of the island is heavy and sweet, like ripening fruit. But outside, far beyond the cliffs, the world has caught fire. Paris of Troy has taken Helen, and the oath of Tyndareus, that clever trap Odysseus set years ago, has sprung shut. The news reached Ithaca like a cold wind. The kings of Greece were gathering their ships. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon were calling in every favor, every vow, and every debt. They knew that to take Troy, they would need more than just swords. They would need the mind of Odysseus. But Odysseus looked at his young wife, Penelope, and his infant son, Telemachus, and he felt a cold dread. An oracle had once warned him, "If you go to Troy, you will not return for 20 years, and you will return alone, a beggar in your own house." When the Greek envoys, the king Palamedes and the clever Menelaus, arrived on the shores of Ithaca, they did not find a king ready for war. Instead, they found a man who appeared to have lost his mind. Odysseus had donned a peasant's cap and gone down to the fields. He had yoked an ox and an ass together, animals of different strengths and gaits that could never pull a straight line. As the messengers watched in confusion, the king of Ithaca began to sow his fields, not with grain, but with salt, whistling a tuneless song as he ruined his own soil. It was a brilliant performance. To the observers, it seemed the man of wrath had been broken by the gods. If he was mad, he was exempt from the oath. He could stay in the sun with his son. Palamedes and the cruel test, but Palamedes, a man whose intellect rivaled Odysseus's own, sensed a ruse. He knew that even a madman loves his blood. While Odysseus steered his mismatched plow across the furrow, Palamedes walked to the edge of the field, where Penelope stood holding the infant Telemachus. Without a word, Palamedes took the baby from her arms. He stepped into the path of the plow. He laid the screaming child in the dirt, right in the line of the sharp bronze blade. The world went silent. Odysseus saw the blade approaching his son's soft skin. In that heartbeat, the mask of madness shattered. He wrenched the reins, digging his heels into the earth to stop the plow, proving to everyone present that his mind was perfectly, painfully clear. He had saved his son, but in doing so, he had doomed himself to the war, the bitter departure. The days that followed were filled with the heavy silence of a long goodbye. Odysseus spent his final hours walking the boundaries of his orchards with Laertes, and sitting by the loom with Penelope. He left her with a heartbreaking command. "When you see our son with a beard upon his chin, and I have not returned, then you may marry again. Choose the best man and leave this house." The last glimpse. The departure was not a grand parade. It was a small boat pulling away from the rocky shore to join the massive fleet at Aulis. Odysseus stood at the stern, watching the peaks of Mount Neriton shrink into the mist. He was leaving behind his youth, his peace, and his family, trading them for a decade of blood and a decade of wandering. As the salt spray hit his face, the man of wrath looked toward the horizon. He did not know that Palamedes had just become his greatest enemy. He did not know that he would not see his son again until the boy was a man. The oars dipped into the water. 1, 2, 3. And the long journey into the darkness of the Trojan War began. The waves are lapping against the hull of the black ship now, and the stars are the only guides. The rhythmic thud of the oars against the Ionian Sea begins to change. The salt spray grows colder, and the air thickens with the smell of wood smoke and bronze. We have reached the shores of the Troad, where 1,000 ships have carved their keels into the sand. This is the theater of heroes, where Odysseus will earn the name that will echo through eternity. Odysseus did not arrive at Troy with the thunderous rage of Achilles, nor the sheer physical mass of Ajax. He was the Polymedes, the man of many shifts. While others burned in the brutal heat of the front lines, Odysseus became the architect of the Greek soul. He was the one who kept the army from collapsing beneath its own weight. Before the war could truly begin, the Greeks knew they needed Achilles. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, had hidden him on the island of Skyros. Disguised as a girl among the king's daughters, it was Odysseus who unmasked him. He went not with a sword. He went as a merchant. He laid out silks and jewels before the maidens, but among the finery he placed a shield and a spear. When the trumpet sounded, the girls fled, but one maiden reached for the spear. Odysseus smiled and led the greatest warrior of the age toward his fate. The strategist and the spy. Through 10 years of siege, Odysseus became the king of the night. While the camp slept, he and Diomedes moved in shadow. They captured the Trojan spy Dolon and stole the snow-white horses of King Rhesus, horses that might have made Troy immortal. Odysseus knew Troy would never fall while Athena's image remained within its walls. He entered the city as a beaten beggar. Even Helen recognized him, but his honeyed tongue kept her silent. He stole the Palladium, and Troy's soul was hollowed. The Greeks were weary. The walls still stood, and Odysseus conceived the masterstroke, a hollow colossus of wood, a lie wrapped in timber and prayer. Odysseus sat in its dark belly, his hand over the mouths of his men. Even as Helen called their names, his discipline held, and Troy dragged its doom through its own gates. When the moon climbed high, Odysseus descended first. The reluctant king became a storm. Fires rose, towers fell, and Ilium turned to ash. Odysseus looked toward the sea, toward his island. He believed his work was done. He did not know the gods were watching, and that the war had been the easy part. The fires of Troy are fading into the distance now, and the water is turning wine-dark purple. The smoke of burning Troy still hangs in the back of your throat, a bitter reminder of a decade lost. The Greek ships are heavy with gold, fine fabrics, and captives. But the air is shifting. The gods are no longer silent spectators. A dark and restless energy stirs beneath the waves. The fall of a city is a heavy thing, and the Greeks forgot the ancient laws of mercy. Even Odysseus could not escape the shadow of their crimes. In the temple of Athena, Ajax dragged Cassandra from the altar. Odysseus called for his death, but the army refused. Athena turned her cold gray eyes away and went to Poseidon. Together they wove storms into the paths of heroes. Odysseus led 12 ships from the blackened shore. He did not wait for all the sacrifices. Ithaca pulled at his marrow. The wind began to howl like grieving mothers. He saw the first signs of the divine trap. For other kings, homecoming meant death or exile. For Odysseus, it meant erasure. The sea would strip him of his name, of his memory, of his place in the world. Poseidon's fury rose beneath the waves. The voyage became a descent into myth, toward gods and monsters and forgotten lands. The ships were driven south, toward the Cicones. The wandering had begun. The sky darkens to bruised purple, and the first great wave is rising to meet the hull. The wind has shifted now, carrying the scent of strange flowers and the damp breath of deep caverns. We enter the heart of the legend, the 10 years of wandering where the man of wrath becomes the man of sorrows. This is a journey not just across the sea, but through the very edges of the known world, where the rules of reality begin to fray. The voyage began in blood at Immerse, the land of the Cicones. Flush with the victory of Troy, Odysseus's men grew greedy and stayed too long to plunder. The counterattack was swift and brutal, costing Odysseus 6 men from every ship. A massive storm sent by Zeus drove them for 9 days across the fish-teeming sea until they reached the land of the lotus eaters. Here, the danger was not a blade, but a flower. Those who ate the honey-sweet fruit of the lotus lost all memory of home. Their nostos dissolved into a hazy, eternal present. Odysseus had to drag his weeping men back to the ships by force, chaining them to the rowing benches. A king forcing his people to remember their own souls. Next, they reached the island of the Cyclopes. Seeking the laws of hospitality, Odysseus led 12 men into the cave of Polyphemus, a son of Poseidon. The giant, a creature of raw, unthinking power, showed no respect for the gods. He sealed the cave and began to eat the crew 2 by 2. Odysseus, trapped in the dark, used his greatest weapon, his mind. He offered the giant a potent, undiluted wine. When the drunken giant asked his name, Odysseus replied, "Autis," which means nobody. While the giant slept, Odysseus and his men sharpened an olive wood stake, heated it in the fire, and drove it into the giant's single eye. When Polyphemus screamed for help, the other Cyclopes shouted from outside, "Who is hurting you?" Polyphemus roared back, "Nobody is killing me," and the others left him to his fate. But as they escaped, Odysseus's pride, his hubris, flared. From the deck of his ship, he shouted his true name. Polyphemus, now knowing his tormentor, prayed to his father, Poseidon, to ensure Odysseus would either never reach home or arrive to find a house of ruin. For a moment, it seemed the curse might be avoided. Aeolus, the master of the winds, gifted Odysseus a leather bag containing all the storm winds, leaving only the west wind to blow them toward Ithaca. They were so close they could see the signal fires on their own shores. But while Odysseus slept, his crew, suspicious that the bag contained gold, sliced it open. The resulting tempest blew them back across the world, landing them in the clutches of the Laestrygonians, cannibal giants who pelted the fleet with boulders. 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships were sunk. Only his own flagship survived, carrying the survivors to the island of Aeaea. On Aeaea lived Circe, a goddess with braided hair and a terrifying voice. She turned Odysseus's scouting party into swine with a touch of her wand and a drop of potion. Odysseus, protected by a holy herb called moly, given to him by Hermes, confronted her. Impressed by his immunity and his wit, Circe became his lover and host. A year passed in her halls of stone and lions. It was Circe who told him that to find his way home, he must do what no living man should. He must descend into the underworld to consult the ghost of the blind prophet Tiresias. In the gloomy land of the Cimmerians, Odysseus poured libations of blood into a trench. The shades of the dead rose like smoke. He saw his mother, who who had died of a broken heart waiting for him. He saw Achilles, who told him he would rather be a slave on earth than a king in the land of the dead. Finally, Tiresias gave him the warning: they must not touch the cattle of the sun, or all would be lost. Returning to the sea, they faced the sirens, whose song was so beautiful it drew sailors to their deaths. Odysseus had his men plug their ears with beeswax, but he, driven by his insatiable curiosity, had himself lashed to the mast so he could hear the music without drowning. Next came the impossible choice: Scylla, a six-headed monster who would snatch 6 men, or Charybdis, a whirlpool that would swallow the entire ship. Following Circe's advice, Odysseus chose Scylla. He watched in silence as his 6 bravest men were plucked from the deck, their dying screams calling his name, the heaviest price he ever paid as a captain. Finally, they reached Thrinacia. Trapped by contrary winds and starving, the men ignored Odysseus's commands and slaughtered the sacred cattle of the sun god, Helios. As punishment, Zeus struck the ship with a lightning bolt. The vessel shattered. Every man drowned except for Odysseus, who clung to a piece of the mast, drifting for 9 days until he reached the island of Ogygia. For 7 years, the nymph Calypso kept him as her consort. She offered him the one thing every mortal craves: immortality. She promised he would never age and never die. But every day, the man of wrath sat on the shore, looking out over the sea, weeping for a rocky island and a mortal wife. He chose a short life of struggle over an eternal life of ease. Finally, at Athena's request, Hermes arrived to command his release. With his own hands, Odysseus built a raft and set sail, one last time, into the teeth of Poseidon's final storm. The raft is breaking apart under the weight of the waves, and Odysseus is stripped of everything but his life. The roar of the storm is fading now, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic washing of the tide against a pebbled shore. You are no longer on the open, angry sea. You are on the mist-shrouded coast of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians. This is the liminal space, the bridge between the world of monsters and the world of men. Odysseus washed ashore not as a king, but as a piece of driftwood. He was naked, encrusted with salt, and exhausted to the very marrow of his bones. He crawled into the shelter of 2 olive trees, one wild, one grafted, representing the duality of his nature, the wild wanderer and the civilized king. There, he buried himself in fallen leaves like a glowing coal hidden in ash, sleeping the deep sleep of the nearly dead. He was awakened by the sounds of laughter. Nausicaa, the princess of the Phaeacians, had come to the river to wash the palace linens, guided by a dream sent by Athena. While her handmaidens fled at the sight of the wild, brine-stained man emerging from the bushes, Nausicaa stood her ground. With his honeyed tongue, Odysseus did not beg for help. He spoke to her with the grace of a courtier, comparing her beauty to a young palm tree he once saw on Delos. This encounter is the softest moment in the epic, a glimpse of the man Odysseus might have been had the war never called him. Nausicaa gave him clothes and directed him to the palace of her father, King Alcinous. The Phaeacians were a people of the sea, beloved by the gods, living in a palace of bronze walls and golden doors. As Odysseus entered, wrapped in a protective mist provided by Athena, he saw a garden where fruit never withered, and a society that valued song and sport above all else. He remained a mystery to them at first. He did not give his name. He sat in the shadows, a silent guest, until the Phaeacian games began. When a young athlete taunted him, suggesting he looked more like a merchant than a warrior, the man of wrath flared. He picked up a discus heavier than any the Phaeacians had used and hurled it far past all their marks, the stone whistling through the air as a reminder of the power still coiled in his weary limbs. That evening, the blind bard Demodocus began to sing. He sang of the Trojan War, of the quarrel between Achilles and Odysseus, and finally, of the wooden horse. As the music filled the hall, the memories Odysseus had kept locked away for 10 years came rushing back. He pulled his purple cloak over his face to hide his tears, weeping like a woman who watches her city fall. King Alcinous noticed the guests' grief and halted the music. "Tell us," the king asked, "who are you, and why does the fate of Troy break your heart?" It was there, in the firelight of the Phaeacian hall, that Odysseus finally spoke the words. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to the world for every kind of craft." For the rest of the night, the Phaeacian sat in breathless silence as he recounted the journey we have just traveled, the Cyclops, the Sirens, the underworld. By the time he finished, the Phaeacians knew they were not just hosting a castaway, but a legend. The Phaeacians, moved by his story, loaded a ship with treasures that far exceeded his lost spoils from Troy. They rowed him toward Ithaca in a ship that seemed to move by thought alone, swift as a falcon. Odysseus fell into a profound, death-like sleep during the crossing. As the morning star rose, the Phaeacian sailors reached the harbor of Phorcys in Ithaca. They gently lifted the sleeping king, still wrapped in his blankets, and laid him on the sand of his own country. They placed his gold and bronze under an olive tree and vanished back into the mist. When Odysseus woke, he did not recognize his home. Athena had drifted a thick fog over the land to test him one last time. He groaned, thinking he had been abandoned on yet another strange island. But then a young shepherd approached, Athena in disguise. When he tried to spin a lie about his identity, she shifted into her true, radiant form and laughed, stroking his hand. "Always the same," she said. "Even in your own land, you cannot stop weaving fables." The mist cleared. The rugged peaks of Mount Neriton appeared. Odysseus knelt and kissed the earth. He was home. But the house he had left 20 years ago was no longer his. The air on the beach is cool, and the fog is lifting. The hero is home, but he is a stranger in his own kingdom. The mist of Ithaca clings to the olive groves, damp and silver in the morning light. Odysseus stands upon the sand, his heart racing, but Athena's hand is on his shoulder, stilling his pulse. The homecoming is not a parade, it is a ghost story. To reclaim his throne, the king must first become a phantom. Athena reaches out and touches Odysseus with her wand. In an instant, his skin withers, his golden brown hair falls away, leaving a scalp sparse and gray. His bright eyes grow rheumy and dim, and his regal robes transform into tattered, soot-stained rags, smelling of stale smoke. He is no longer the conqueror of Troy. He is a wretched wanderer, a man whom the world would rather look past than look at. This is his final disguise, the ultimate test of his Midas. His first stop is not the palace, but the upland farm of Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd. Eumaeus has remained faithful for 20 years, mourning his lost master while living in a hut of stone and brush. Even in his rags, Odysseus is treated with the ancient law of xenia, hospitality. Eumaeus shares his humble meal of roasted pork and wine, cursing the suitors who devour the king's estate. Here, Odysseus listens. He learns of his father's grief and his wife's legendary endurance. He sees the man of wrath through the eyes of those who loved him, and for the first time in 2 decades, he feels the weight of the crown he is about to reclaim. While at the swineherd's hut, a young man arrives, Telemachus, back from his own journey to find news of his father. Athena signals to Odysseus, and for a brief moment she restores his kingly stature. The reunion is a storm of tears. Telemachus at first fears he is looking at a god, but Odysseus holds him, crying out, "I am your father, on whose account you have ended many groans and endured the violence of men." They sit in the dim light of the hut, not as father and child, but as two generals, plotting the downfall of the 108 suitors who have occupied their home. Odysseus returns to the palace in his beggar's skin. At the threshold, he finds Argos, his old hunting dog, lying abandoned on a pile of dung, infested with ticks. Argos is the only one who recognizes him instantly. The old dog thumps his tail once, his ears drooping, and having seen his master one last time, he lets out his final breath and dies. Inside the great hall, the suitors are a riot of noise and gluttony. They mock the beggar, throwing footstools at him and forcing him to box another beggar for their amusement. Odysseus endures it all. He lets the blows land, his mind a cold, calculating machine. He is measuring the layout of the room, checking the exits, and testing the loyalty of the servants. In the quiet of the night, Penelope summons the beggar, hoping he has news of her husband. They sit across from each other in the firelight. It is a scene of profound irony. The husband and wife, separated by 20 years, and now by a layer of divine disguise. Odysseus tells her a true lie, claiming to have met Odysseus in Crete. He describes his own clothing, a purple cloak and a gold brooch, with such detail that Penelope weeps. He sees her grief and her strength, and he realizes that she has been fighting her own war of wits against the suitors, weaving and unweaving her shroud to buy him time. She does not recognize him, but she senses something. She orders the old nurse, Eurycleia, to wash his feet. As the old woman bathes him, her fingers brush against the heavy, jagged ridge of flesh above his knee. The scar. She gasps, dropping his foot into the bronze basin with a loud clang. Odysseus catches her by the throat, his eyes flashing with the old iron of the battlefield. "Nurse," he whispers, "would you destroy me?" She promises silence, her heart bursting with the secret. The night draws to a close. Penelope, inspired by Athena, announces her final decision to the suitors. She will marry the man who can perform a feat only Odysseus could do, string the great bow of Eurytus, and shoot an arrow through the rings of 12 axe heads set in a row. The bow is a relic of his youth, a weapon of such tension that no ordinary man can even bend it. As the suitors prepare for the contest, Odysseus watches from the shadows of the hall. The beggar's rags are still draped over his shoulders, but beneath them, the muscles of the hero are beginning to coil. The halls are being cleared, and the axes are being set in the earth. The sun is rising on the day of blood. The air in the great hall of Ithaca is thick, not with the smell of roasting meat, but with the cold, metallic scent of impending doom. The light of the setting sun streams through the high windows, casting long, spear-like shadows across the stone floor. The time for masks and stories has ended. The man of wrath is about to reclaim his name. The contest begins. One by one, the suitors, men who have spent years preening and feasting, step forward to string the great bow of Odysseus. They rub the wood with tallow and heat it by the fire, trying to coax the ancient horn and timber into submission. But the bow is stubborn. It refuses to bend for them. It is a king's weapon, and it knows the touch of only one master. Telemachus has already done his part. Under the guise of clearing the air, he has removed all the decorative shields and spears from the walls of the hall, locking them in the treasury. The suitors are trapped, armed only with the small daggers at their belts. The beggar steps forward. The suitors mock him, laughing at the idea of a vagrant touching the weapon of a hero. But Odysseus ignores them. He handles the bow as a master musician handles a lyre, checking the string and the wood for cracks. Then, with a seated, effortless grace, he bends the bow and slips the notch of the string into place. The cord twangs, a high, vibrating note like the cry of a swallow. The hall goes silent. Odysseus takes a single feathered arrow, notches it, and lets it fly. It streaks through the air, passing through the narrow circles of all 12 axe heads without grazing a single one. Odysseus leaps to the high threshold of the door, stripping away his rags. He stands before them in his true form, terrible and radiant. He pours the quiver of arrows out at his feet. "The contest is over," he roars. "Now for a target no man has hit before." The first arrow finds the throat of Antinous, the most arrogant of the suitors, just as he raises a golden cup of wine to his lips. The hall erupts into chaos. The suitors realize they are trapped in a room with the man they have spent a decade insulting. Odysseus, Telemachus, and the loyal swineherd Eumaeus become a whirlwind of bronze. There is no mercy in this room. The man of wrath is exacting a 10-year debt of disrespect, and he pays it in full. When the floor is silent and the suitors lie in heaps, Odysseus calls for the nurse Eurycleia. He orders the 12 maidservants who had betrayed the house and consorted with the suitors to clean the hall. They scrub the blood from the tables and the stone, weeping as they work. Once the house is purified with sulfur and fire, the women are led out and executed, a grim, uncompromising restoration of the king's absolute order. Even now, the battle is not quite over. Penelope, having slept through the slaughter in a divine slumber sent by Athena, descends to the hall. She sees the man covered in blood, claiming to be her husband, but she is the one person in the world as cautious as Odysseus himself. She will not be fooled by an impostor. She tests him. She orders Eurycleia to move their great bed out of the bridal chamber so the guest can sleep. Odysseus flares with a familiar, personal anger. "Who has moved my bed?" he demands. He describes in perfect detail how he built that bed around a living olive tree, its roots deep in the earth, its trunk forming a post that cannot be moved unless the house itself is torn down. This secret, known only to the two of them, is the final key. Penelope's knees fail her. She runs to him, and for the first time in 20 years, the man of many sorrows holds his wise Penelope. Athena holds back the dawn, stretching the night so the two can talk, weep, and bridge the 2 decades that lay between them. The following morning, Odysseus travels to the upland farm to find his father, Laertes. The old king is dressed in rags, grieving in his garden. Odysseus, unable to resist one last cunning lie, pretends to be a traveler, but when he sees his father's immense sorrow, he breaks. He reveals the scar on his leg and points to the very trees Laertes gave him when he was a boy. The family is finally whole. A final skirmish with the families of the dead suitors threatens to restart the war, but Athena descends as a mentor, commanding peace. The cycle of blood is broken. The king is back. The sun is finally rising over a quiet Ithaca. The king is in his halls, and his wife is by his side. But even in peace, the prophecy of Tiresias whispers in the back of his mind. The sun is setting now over the Ionian Sea, casting long, golden fingers across the reclaimed halls of Ithaca. The blood has been washed away, the sulfur has purified the air, and the king sits once more upon his throne. But as you settle into the final pages of this legend, you must understand that for a man like Odysseus, home is not a final destination, but a brief rest between the tides. Peace has returned to the island, but the ghost of Tiresias still speaks in Odysseus's dreams. The prophet had warned him in the underworld that his debt to Poseidon was not yet paid. To truly end the curse of the sea, Odysseus must perform one final, strange pilgrimage. Years after the slaughter of the suitors, when Telemachus has grown into a strong co-regent, Odysseus takes a well-polished oar from his ship. He does not head for the harbor, but for the mountains. He walks inland, further and further from the sound of the crashing surf. He carries the oar over his shoulder, passing through valleys and over peaks, until he reaches a land where the people have never seen the sea. These people do not salt their meat. They do not know the taste of brine. Finally, a traveler meets him on the road and asks why he is carrying a winnowing fan, a tool for separating grain, on his shoulder. This is the sign. In this place, where the oar is mistaken for a farm tool, the sea has no power. Odysseus plants the oar deep into the earth and offers a great sacrifice to Poseidon, a ram, a bull, and a boar. The debt is settled. The sea god is appeased, and the man of wrath is finally allowed to grow old in peace. But the past has a way of returning. Years ago, on the island of Aeaea, the enchantress Circe bore Odysseus a son named Telegonus. As the boy reached manhood, he set out to find the father he had never known. Telegonus arrived on the shores of Ithaca, but a storm had driven him to hunger. He began to raid the island's cattle for food. Odysseus, now an old man but still the protector of his land, went out to meet the raider with a spear in his hand. In the dim light of a coastal skirmish, father and son engaged in combat, neither knowing the other's face. Telegonus carried a unique spear tipped with the jagged, poisonous spine of a stingray, a gift from his mother, Circe. With a swift thrust, Telegonus pierced his father's side. As Odysseus lay dying on the sand, he recognized the youth's features and the origin of the weapon. He realized the prophecy of Tiresias had come true in the most literal sense. His death had come out of the sea. It was a gentle death in the arms of a son beneath the stars of his own kingdom. The story of Odysseus does not end with his burial. His spirit, according to the ancient poets, was granted a place in the Elysian fields, the paradise for heroes. Telemachus continued to rule Ithaca with the wisdom he learned from his father. Penelope remained the archetype of the faithful, brilliant woman, her name becoming synonymous with patience. Centuries later, the Romans would rename him Ulysses, transforming him from a trickster into a symbol of the Stoic explorer. From Dante's Inferno to Joyce's Ulysses, the man of many turns continues to represent the human condition, the restless urge to know, to see, and to find one's way back home through a world of monsters. The candle is flickering now, almost spent. The oars are still, and the man of many sorrows is finally at rest. The legend is complete, but the sea, the sea is still there, whispering his name against the rocks of Ithaca.